The United States government told the world that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. That claim shaped a war, reshaped a region, and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. It turned out to be wrong. Now, more than 2 decades later, the world's most authoritative nuclear watchdog has just stepped forward and said something that should stop every serious person dead in their tracks. That after exhaustive inspections, months of rigorous monitoring, and detailed analysis of nuclear material across Iran, its experts have found no credible evidence that Iran is actively pursuing the development of nuclear weapons. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a whisper, not a footnote buried in a classified annex, a public declaration from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the organization that exists specifically to answer this exact question. And the answer, according to their own inspectors, is no. No structured weapons program, no verified weaponization activities, no credible evidence that Iran is building a bomb. Now, you might be wondering, if that's true, then what exactly have we been hearing for the last 20 years from Washington and Tel Aviv? What were all those warnings about? What were the sanctions for? What were the military threats designed to prevent? Those are exactly the right questions to be asking. And tonight, we are going to walk through every single one of them carefully, deliberately, and without flinching, because this IAEA announcement is not a minor bureaucratic update. This is a geopolitical earthquake. And the aftershocks are already being felt in diplomatic capitals, financial markets, military planning rooms, and public discourse around the world. Let's start with what the IAEA actually said, because precision matters here. Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, made it explicitly clear that while Iran possesses nuclear material and operates enrichment facilities, there is no indication of a coordinated or active weapons program. The agency conducted complex satellite monitoring. It carried out on-site inspections wherever access was permitted. It analyzed Iran's nuclear material holdings in meticulous detail, and after all of that work, the conclusion was the same: no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons production program in Iran. Now, the IAEA was careful and appropriately precise. Grossi did not say that Iran's nuclear program is without concern. He did not say that Iran has zero nuclear capabilities. Far from it. Iran has amassed enriched uranium. Some of that uranium has been enriched at levels higher than what you would typically expect from a purely civilian energy program. That is a fact. That is on the table. But here is the critical distinction that too many people in powerful positions have deliberately blurred for too many years. Enriched uranium is not a nuclear weapon. Having the technical capacity to enrich uranium is not the same thing as building a bomb. The difference between a civilian nuclear program and a military one is not simply the existence of enriched material. It is intent. It is the active, coordinated weaponization steps, the bomb design work, the detonation mechanisms, the delivery system development. And those are the steps that the IAEA has not found. Those are the activities that inspectors have not verified. That is the line that, according to the world's foremost nuclear authority, Iran has not crossed. This is not a technicality. This is the entire argument. For years, and we are talking about sustained, coordinated, relentless political messaging across multiple administrations and multiple Israeli governments. The world has been told that Iran was racing toward a nuclear bomb, that Tehran was on the brink, that the window to stop them was closing, that the threat was existential, imminent, and demanded an aggressive response. Sanctions were imposed. Military options were openly discussed. Treaties were abandoned. Regional alliances were restructured. All of it, at least in part, justified by the claim that Iran was building a nuclear weapon. And now the organization specifically chartered to verify that claim has said, "We have not found evidence that it is true." This is the kind of moment that demands honesty, not political spin, not defensive posturing, honesty. Let's be clear about what the IAEA is and what its mandate actually covers. The International Atomic Energy Agency is the world's leading authority on nuclear energy and nuclear proliferation monitoring. Its role is technical and deliberately narrow. It tracks nuclear material. It monitors enrichment levels. It verifies compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, known as the NPT. It does not make broad geopolitical policy judgments. It does not weigh in on regional power dynamics. It does not take sides in diplomatic disputes. What it does is verify, and what it has verified, or rather, what it has specifically not verified, is an active Iranian nuclear weapons program. That confirmation carries enormous weight precisely because of its source. This is not a fringe analysis. This is not an anti-war advocacy group. This is not a sympathetic foreign government trying to protect a geopolitical partner. This is the IAEA. And their word on nuclear matters is, by international consensus, the most authoritative word there is. So what happens now? Well, the political fallout is already beginning to take shape, and it is complicated. U.S. officials are facing a genuinely difficult position. For years, American administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have built a substantial part of their Iran policy around the premise that Tehran was developing a nuclear weapon and needed to be stopped. That premise has been used to justify an enormous architecture of economic pressure. It has been used to explain the withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal. Back in 2018, it has been used to rationalize military posturing in the region, increased naval deployments, expanded defense partnerships, and a general orientation toward confrontation rather than negotiation. Now, with the IAEA publicly stating that there is no verified evidence of an active weapons program, the strategic justification for that entire architecture is under serious strain. That does not mean American concerns about Iran disappear. Washington has pointed to other legitimate issues: Iran's ballistic missile program, its support for regional proxy networks, its conventional military capabilities. Those are real concerns. They exist entirely independently of the nuclear weapons question. But the nuclear weapons argument was always the sharpest edge of the blade. It was the claim that made the threat feel existential, and that claim has just been officially contested by the most credible authority on the planet. Israeli officials face a similar reckoning. Israeli leaders across multiple governments and across the political spectrum have consistently and forcefully argued that a nuclear-armed Iran represents an existential threat to Israel. Prime ministers have issued stark warnings. Military officials have discussed timelines and red lines. The argument has been made repeatedly, loudly, and with great urgency that Iran was approaching the point of no return on nuclear weapons development. That argument has been central to Israeli diplomatic strategy, its lobbying of American and European governments, and its justification for considering preemptive military options. The IAEA's finding does not make Iran a friendly neighbor to Israel. It does not resolve the deep hostility between Jerusalem and Tehran. It does not address Iran's support for groups that have threatened Israeli security. But it does directly challenge the most dramatic and consequential version of the threat narrative, the claim that Iran is imminently building a nuclear bomb. And that challenge comes from an organization that itself has historically recognized as a legitimate authority on nuclear matters. Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iranian officials have maintained for years consistently and publicly that their nuclear program is entirely peaceful energy generation, medical isotope production, scientific research. Iran has long insisted that the accusations of weapons development were politically motivated fabrications designed to justify external pressure and interference. The IAEA's finding does not validate everything that Iranian officials have ever said. Questions about transparency, cooperation with inspectors, and the pace and scope of enrichment activities remain relevant. But it does mean that the core accusation that Iran is actively building a nuclear weapon is not supported by verified technical evidence. That is significant. That changes the terms of the conversation. For countries across Europe, Asia, and the broader Middle East that have advocated for diplomatic engagement with Iran rather than escalating pressure, the IAEA's assessment provides something valuable. It provides a credible, authoritative, technical foundation for the argument that coercive tactics are not justified by the current evidence. European nations, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, have consistently tried to preserve diplomatic channels with Tehran even as relations between Iran and the United States deteriorated sharply. Those countries have long argued that engagement, verification, and incentive-based approaches are more effective than sanctions and threats. Now they have the IAEA's findings to reinforce that position. This opens the door, at least in principle, to renewed negotiation frameworks, confidence-building measures, a return to the kind of structured diplomacy that produced the original Iran nuclear deal before it was abandoned. Whether that door actually gets walked through depends on the political will of the parties involved. That political will is far from guaranteed. But the technical basis for claiming that diplomacy is naive and only pressure works has just been significantly weakened. The economic implications of this announcement are also worth examining carefully because they are real and potentially substantial. Global markets, particularly energy markets, have for years operated with a certain geopolitical risk premium built into their pricing. The ongoing fear of a nuclear-armed Iran and the possibility of military conflict that could disrupt oil flows through the Persian Gulf has been a persistent factor in how traders and investors calculate risk. Oil markets are notoriously sensitive to Middle East geopolitical tensions. Any credible signal that the threat level is lower than previously believed can affect how markets behave, with the IAEA stating clearly that it has found no evidence of an active Iranian weapons program. There is a reasonable basis for financial markets to begin recalibrating their assessment of geopolitical risk in the region. That does not mean instability disappears. Other tensions remain, but the specific scenario of a nuclear-armed Iran triggering regional catastrophe, a scenario that has influenced market behavior for a long time, now has a credible counter, narrative backed by the world's leading nuclear authority. It is also worth stepping back and placing this moment in its broader historical context, because that context is essential for understanding why this announcement carries the weight that it does. The question of Iran's nuclear program has been one of the defining geopolitical flashpoints of the last 3 decades. It has shaped American foreign policy, strained transatlantic alliances, influenced the internal politics of Middle Eastern nations, and consumed enormous diplomatic energy and financial resources. The narrative of a nuclear-armed Iran as an imminent existential threat became deeply embedded in the political consciousness of Washington, Jerusalem, and many allied capitals. It was repeated so often, with such consistency, and by such authoritative-sounding voices that it became almost an accepted fact, background assumption rather than contested claim. That is precisely why the IAEA's finding is so significant. Not because it resolves every question about Iran's nuclear activities, not because it eliminates every legitimate concern about enrichment levels, transparency, or long-term intent, but because it injects verified technical reality into a debate that has for too long been dominated by political assertion. U.S. intelligence agencies and their European counterparts have not always agreed on the precise details of Iran's nuclear timeline. There have been moments, including the landmark 2007 U.S. National Intelligence Estimate, when American intelligence agencies themselves concluded that Iran had halted certain weapons-related activities. Those assessments created friction with the dominant political narrative at the time. They were often downplayed, reframed, or simply overwhelmed by the louder voices insisting that Iran was on the brink. The IAEA's current finding exists in that same uncomfortable space, a piece of verified technical reality pushing back against years of political narrative. One important nuance deserves to be stated plainly. The absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The IAEA's inspectors have said they have not found evidence of an active weapons program. That finding is constrained by the access they have been able to obtain. Iran has, at various points, limited or restricted certain forms of inspection access. Some protocols have been suspended. Snap inspections have not always been permitted. The IAEA itself has noted that ongoing conflict in the region has complicated inspection activities. All of that is real. All of that matters. Continued robust inspection access is not just desirable, it is essential. If the world is going to rely on technical verification as the basis for policy decisions, then that verification process needs to be as thorough and unobstructed as possible. Some analysts have argued precisely this, that the IAEA's findings should be used not to reduce scrutiny of Iran's nuclear activities, but to strengthen the mechanisms of verification and encourage Iran to provide greater inspection access as a demonstration of its stated peaceful intent. That is a reasonable and serious argument. Transparency is not just a diplomatic nicety. In the context of nuclear proliferation, it is a foundational requirement. But here's what cannot be argued away. The IAEA, the organization that exists specifically to answer the question of whether countries are developing nuclear weapons, has said that it has not found evidence that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. That finding cannot be wished away by political actors who find it inconvenient. It cannot be overcome by repeating the old narrative more loudly or more insistently. It is the product of technical inspection work carried out by the most qualified people in the world for exactly this purpose. That matters. That should shape how we talk about this issue. That should inform how policymakers, journalists, and citizens evaluate the claims they have been hearing for years about Iran and the bomb. The implications of this moment extend beyond Iran specifically. We are at a point in international relations where the credibility of multilateral institutions is under enormous pressure. Organizations like the IAEA, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, their authority depends on the willingness of major powers to respect their findings, even when those findings are politically inconvenient. When authoritative technical assessments are dismissed or ignored because they clash with a preferred political narrative, it corrodes the entire framework of international verification and arms control. The IAEA's willingness to state clearly what its inspectors have and have not found, regardless of the political discomfort that creates, is actually an example of that institutional integrity functioning as it should. The response of governments, analysts, and the public to that finding will say a great deal about whether the international framework for managing nuclear risks is capable of operating on the basis of evidence rather than politics. For viewers trying to make sense of where this leaves the world, here is the clearest summary possible. Iran has nuclear material and enrichment capabilities. That is real. Iran has enriched uranium at levels that exceed purely civilian norms. That is a legitimate subject for ongoing monitoring and diplomatic engagement. Questions about Iran's long-term strategic intentions, its transparency with inspectors, and its compliance with international agreements remain open and important. None of those concerns have evaporated. But the central, explosive claim that has driven 2 decades of maximum pressure campaigns, military threats, sanctions architecture, and regional confrontation, the claim that Iran is actively, right now, building a nuclear weapon, that claim does not have the verified technical support that its proponents have always implied it did. The IAEA has said so, clearly, publicly, authoritatively. This is an inflection point. The question going forward is not merely what Iran could theoretically do with its nuclear capabilities. The question is what Iran is actually doing, what the evidence actually shows, and how the international community responds to that reality rather than to a narrative built around worst-case assumptions. History will judge how governments, institutions, and public figures respond to this moment, whether they adjust their positions to align with the evidence, whether they continue to insist on narratives that the IAEA has now officially challenged, whether they use this moment to build a more durable and evidence-based approach to one of the most consequential security questions of our time. Those judgments are still being written. But the finding itself is now on the record. The IAEA has spoken, and what it has said should fundamentally change how this conversation is conducted from this point forward. Stay with us. This story is far from over. Every development will be covered in full depth with the seriousness and precision that a moment like this demands. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a single update as this geopolitical story continues to unfold.